Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In the dimly lit hospital room, Sally's hands trembled as she gripped Audra's arm, the fluorescent lights above casting cold, clinical shadows that mirrored the storm raging in her heart. Audra's eyes, usually so full of confidence and resolve, were wide with panic, and her voice quivered as she whispered, "Sally. I can't. I just can't do this." The room seemed to close in around them, the steady beep of the heart monitor punctuating the unbearable tension. Sally's mind raced, memories of their shared laughter and whispered secrets flashing in rapid, painful sequences, and with a surge of determination, she shook her head, her voice firm yet suffused with the raw emotion she couldn't contain. "No, Audra. You're not doing this. Not today. Not ever," she said, her words carrying a mixture of fear, desperation, and fierce protectiveness. Audra tried to pull away, but Sally held her tighter, unwilling to let the darkness of regret and fear make a decision for her friend, unwilling to allow a life to slip silently through her fingers, a life neither of them fully understood yet but that demanded recognition. Outside, the city's relentless hum seemed muted, as if the universe itself had paused to watch this fraught confrontation, the weight of possibility pressing down on every surface, on every heartbeat. The air smelled sterile, cold, almost hostile, but beneath that, there was a faint, underlying warmth, the fragile glimmer of hope Sally clung to as if her very soul depended on it. She could see the conflict etched across Audra's face, the exhaustion, the terror, the overwhelming responsibility of choice, and yet in that fleeting moment, there was also a spark of trust, a recognition that Sally's determination was not judgment but love, a love that had always been complicated, fierce, and impossibly brave. "Audra, I know you're scared," Sally continued, her voice barely above a whisper now, quivering with urgency. "But there's more to this. There's a chance for life here, for love, for a future that neither of us can fully control but that we can fight for. Don't erase this possibility before you even let it breathe." Audra's hands shook as they hovered over her stomach, and tears welled up, threatening to spill. Sally reached out and took them, holding them gently, silently imploring her friend to trust, to pause, to consider what it meant to choose hope over despair, to choose courage over fear. The conversation stretched on, the clock ticking mercilessly, each second a drumbeat of potential loss and salvation. And in that tense silence, Audra's resolve wavered, the grip of her initial decision loosening in the face of Sally's unwavering presence. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded, a single, trembling gesture that felt monumental, cataclysmic even, in its significance. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with emotion. "Okay, I'll stop." Relief surged through Sally, almost suffocating her with its intensity. And for a moment, everything seemed still, suspended in the fragile bubble of new beginnings, in the recognition that a choice had been reversed, a life spared, and a bond between two women forged even stronger through crisis. But as the immediate danger passed, Sally's thoughts turned to the next, perhaps even more complicated question: what about Nate? The man whose presence had always hovered at the periphery of their lives, whose affections had been both a balm and a complication, now loomed larger than ever in Sally's mind. She had seen him from afar, glimpsed the way his jaw tightened when faced with decisions that threatened his heart, the way his eyes betrayed the emotions he so often tried to mask. Nate, with his quiet intensity, his loyalty that could sometimes feel like a burden and at other times a sanctuary, had always been unpredictable, especially when it came to matters of the heart. Could he forgive Sally for her bold, fearless interference? Could he see the layers of care, courage, and humanity that drove her actions rather than the chaos they had caused? Would he be willing to take a chance on someone who had, in her own way, rewritten the script of someone else's life, someone who had risked everything for the sake of another? Sally couldn't know for sure, and the uncertainty gnawed at her even as she clung to the present moment, the delicate thread of victory she had achieved in preventing a decision made in fear and despair. Later, when Audra rested, physically exhausted but emotionally steadied by the reversal of her course, Sally found herself wandering the quiet hospital corridors, the weight of solitude pressing against her chest, and there he was, Nate, standing at the far end of the hall, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Time seemed to slow as they approached each other, the soft hum of fluorescent lights above echoing the steady, anxious beat of her heart. "Sally," he said finally, his voice low but carrying an edge of something she couldn't immediately place. Anger? Confusion? Longing? All at once, she thought, and yet none entirely. She met his gaze, searching for the answer, for some clue to the decisions and emotions hidden behind those guarded eyes. She began, but words failed her, unable to encapsulate the storm of feelings, the depth of her conviction, the risk she had just taken, and the fear that this act of courage might estrange her from him rather than draw him closer. Nate's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of understanding, recognition of the complexity of her motives, and perhaps even admiration, but there was hesitation too, a reminder that actions, no matter how noble, carried consequences, and that trust, once challenged, required time to rebuild. "I know what you did," he said, voice barely above a whisper, yet every syllable struck like a drumbeat in her chest. You stopped her from making a choice you thought was wrong." Sally nodded, a single movement heavy with relief, fear, and hope, and in that instant, she realized that the road ahead would be fraught with questions, judgments, and uncertainties, yet also moments of connection, revelation, and perhaps, if they were lucky, reconciliation. "Yes," she admitted, swallowing hard, her voice quivering under the weight of honesty. "I couldn't stand by. I had to act. I had to try." Nate's jaw tightened again, and for a moment, it seemed as if the past, the pain, and the misunderstandings might erect an impenetrable wall between them. But then, slowly, he stepped closer, the tension in his body easing just enough to allow a hint of vulnerability to peek through. "And, do you think I can forgive that?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like an unspoken challenge, a test of faith, of love, of willingness to accept the risks that came with caring for someone like Sally, someone unflinchingly brave, sometimes reckless, but always real. Sally's lips parted, a small, tentative smile brushing across her face, fragile yet resolute. "I don't know," she whispered. "But I hope so. I hope you see why I did it, and I hope you understand that it wasn't about control or judgment. It was about love, love for her, love for life, love for doing what's right, even when it's terrifying." Nate studied her for a long, heavy moment, and the air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities, the delicate, electric tension of two people standing on the edge of something profound, something that could either blossom into a new chapter or fracture under the weight of fear, pride, and past hurts. Finally, he exhaled, a long, low sound, and reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with an almost tender reverence that made her heart lurch. "We'll see," he said simply, a phrase loaded with ambiguity, yet not without hope. "We'll see if there's a chance." And in that moment, Sally felt a fragile, radiant flicker of possibility ignite within her, a recognition that the hardest battles often led to the most meaningful victories, that courage could forge new paths even in the shadow of fear, and that love, in all its complicated, messy, beautiful forms, was always worth the risk. Outside the hospital window, the city lights twinkled like distant stars, indifferent to the human dramas unfolding below, yet somehow echoing the quiet triumph of a decision reversed, a life preserved, and the tenuous promise of connection between two hearts daring to hope again. She took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling around her like a protective cloak, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to imagine a future where mistakes could be forgiven, courage could be celebrated, and love could take root even in the most unlikely of places. Audra's soft, exhausted murmur of gratitude reached her ears from down the hall, a reminder that the battle had been won, that fear had been met with resolve, and that even in the midst of uncertainty, choices, brave, selfless, and heart-driven, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways unimaginable. And as Nate's steady presence anchored her fears, Sally realized that while the road ahead would be uncertain, it was also full of potential, and sometimes, that fragile promise of tomorrow was enough to keep hope alive, to keep hearts daring to beat, and to keep love from slipping quietly into the night without a fight. In that charged, electric space, where courage met consequence, where fear met resolve, and where hearts met the delicate possibility of forgiveness, Sally knew that life had changed in irrevocable ways, not just for Audra, not just for herself, but for the tangled, unpredictable web of love, trust, and hope that connected them all. And in that knowledge, raw and consuming, she felt both the terror and the thrill of being alive, of being human, and of standing on the precipice of a new beginning, daring to hope that maybe, just maybe, Nate would step forward with her, into the unknown, into the life they might forge together, heart by heart, choice by choice, day by day. The hospital corridor seemed to stretch on forever, its sterile walls echoing the faint, hurried footsteps of nurses and doctors, the distant hum of machinery blending with the thundering pulse in Sally's chest as she tried to steady herself, each breath a conscious effort to remain composed while the storm of emotions inside threatened to spill over, threatening to undo her very sense of control. Nate remained by her side, quiet but present, a presence that was at once comforting and terrifying, because it reminded her that her choices, her courage, and her reckless intervention had consequences that could ripple far beyond the walls of the hospital room. They walked in silence for a while, the kind of silence that speaks volumes in its tension, the kind where every glance, every subtle shift in posture, is scrutinized, dissected, weighed, and judged. Sally's mind replayed the confrontation with Audra over and over, every word, every gesture, every flicker of fear or relief captured in perfect, painful detail, and she couldn't help but wonder if Nate had seen all of it, if he understood the sheer magnitude of what she had done, not just stopping the abortion, but intervening in someone else's life in a way that could change everything. Nate finally spoke, his voice low, hesitant, carrying the weight of someone who had been forced to confront emotions he wasn't entirely ready to name. "Sally, you didn't just stop her," he said, pausing to run a hand through his hair as if trying to untangle the knot of thoughts in his own mind. You put yourself in the middle of something you didn't fully understand. And you risked everything, our trust, her trust, your own safety, maybe even your heart." Sally swallowed hard, the knot in her throat tightening, but she didn't pull away from his gaze. She needed him to see that she hadn't acted out of selfishness, hadn't acted recklessly, not in the way he might think. "I know," she admitted, her voice trembling, raw and unguarded. "I know it looks like that. But it wasn't reckless, Nate. I couldn't let her make a choice out of fear, out of pain, out of despair. There was another way, a way that could still give her a chance at life, a chance to see hope. I had to try. I had to step in." Nate's expression softened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders didn't entirely vanish. "And you think that gives you the right?" he asked, and though there was a hint of accusation in his tone, there was also something deeper, an underlying question of whether love and courage were enough to justify the actions that followed. Sally stepped closer, daring to bridge the distance that had seemed insurmountable just moments ago. "It's not about rights or wrongs," she said softly, her eyes locked on his. "It's about doing what's right when it matters the most, even if it scares you, even if it risks everything you thought you knew about yourself." For a long, breathless moment, they simply stood there, two souls suspended in the delicate balance of judgment and understanding, fear and hope, tension and longing. Outside, the world carried on oblivious, but in that quiet hospital corridor, every heartbeat, every unspoken word, every tremor of emotion carried the weight of consequence, the gravity of decisions that could not be undone, and the fragile promise that sometimes, even in the midst of chaos, something beautiful could emerge. As they walked back toward Audra's room, Sally felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension, knowing that the immediate crisis had passed but that the ripple effects of her actions were only beginning to unfold. Audra lay on the bed, pale but peaceful, the exhaustion of emotion etched across her features, and when she saw Sally, her eyes filled with tears, gratitude, and something more complex, something that spoke of trust regained and hope rekindled. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice weak but earnest, and Sally felt a warmth spread through her chest, a validation that the fear, the risk, the tension had been worth it. But even as she allowed herself that fleeting moment of victory, her mind returned to Nate, to the question that lingered in the air like a suspended note in a symphony of uncertainty: would he forgive her, would he understand, and would he be willing to step forward, to take a chance on her, on them, on the possibility that love could endure even when choices were complicated, messy, and fraught with consequence? Nate's presence was magnetic, grounding yet challenging, and Sally felt the pull of desire, fear, hope, and uncertainty all at once. She knew that in the next moments, the next hours, the next days, they would have to confront not just what had happened, but what it meant for their future. As she sat beside Audra, holding her hand, Nate moved to stand at the foot of the bed, his expression thoughtful, unreadable in the shadows of the room. "She's going to be okay," Sally said softly, almost more to herself than to him. "And maybe we can figure out a way forward. All of us." Nate's gaze flicked between Audra and Sally, and in that silent exchange, so much was communicated: fear, relief, longing, judgment, and a tentative spark of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the bonds of trust and love could be repaired, even strengthened, in the wake of such dramatic events. Outside the hospital, the city carried on, unaware of the human dramas unfolding within its walls, but inside, every breath, every heartbeat, every tremor of emotion mattered profoundly. Sally could feel it, the electricity of possibility, the delicate tension of choices that had consequences beyond comprehension, and the intoxicating, terrifying knowledge that love, in all its messy, unpredictable glory, demanded courage, honesty, and sometimes, the willingness to risk everything for the sake of someone else. Audra squeezed her hand, a simple gesture loaded with meaning, and Sally felt the enormity of the responsibility she had undertaken, the stakes of intervention, and the profound truth that even in the midst of uncertainty, actions rooted in compassion and courage could ripple outward in ways that changed lives irrevocably. And as Nate finally stepped closer, closing the distance that had seemed so vast, Sally realized that the question wasn't just whether he would forgive her, it was whether they could, together, navigate the treacherous, exhilarating, terrifying landscape of love, trust, and human connection, and whether the fragile spark of possibility that now flickered between them could grow into something enduring, something real, something worth every risk, every sleepless night, every trembling heartbeat. That had brought them to this pivotal moment. In that charged silence, saturated with the weight of emotion, fear, hope, and the unspoken complexities of human choice, Sally felt a fragile, dazzling clarity. Life was unpredictable, love was demanding, and courage was everything. And as she looked at Nate, standing there with all the unspoken questions and possibilities in his gaze, she realized that the journey was only beginning, that the next steps, the next conversations, the next risks would define not just the fate of one life saved, but the future of two hearts daring to hope against the odds, to trust, to forgive, and to love, in all its messy, miraculous, devastating, and transcendent glory. And so, in that quiet hospital room, surrounded by the soft hum of machines, the faint scent of antiseptic, and the heavy, electric air of possibility, Sally understood that she had stopped more than an abortion, she had intervened in fate itself, and now, standing on the precipice of tomorrow, she could only hope that Nate would take her hand, that they would walk forward together into the uncertain dawn, into the uncharted territory of love tested and hearts laid bare, ready to face whatever came next with courage, conviction, and the unwavering knowledge that sometimes, the bravest choice is the one that defies fear and chooses hope. The tension in the room was palpable, almost suffocating, as Nate and Sally stood in quiet proximity, the space between them charged with unspoken words, tentative hopes, and the fragile possibility of forgiveness. Audra rested, her breathing steady but shallow, the exhaustion of her ordeal etched across her features, and Sally found herself stealing glances at her, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and lingering worry. She had done the impossible, stopped a decision that had seemed final, rewritten a moment of despair into a pause for hope, but the weight of it settled heavily on her chest. She realized that while the immediate danger had passed, the ripple effects were just beginning. Her heart thumped violently as she turned back to Nate, searching for a sign, a flicker of understanding, anything that would indicate he might see her not as reckless or overbearing, but as someone who had acted from the deepest corners of care and courage. Nate's eyes, dark and unreadable, softened for the briefest of moments, betraying a trace of empathy, a recognition of her bravery, and yet there remained that lingering hesitation, that quiet question of whether he could bridge the gap between admiration and acceptance, between concern and love. Sally's pulse quickened, the uncertainty was almost unbearable, but she knew she had to face it, to meet it head-on.